Hello, I'm Tara Brabazon and I'm the Dean of Graduate Research at Flinders University. Welcome to Vlog 274. Bend, don't break. This is the end of our Rescue Yourself, Rescue Ourselves series, and this series has sat in some uncomfortable spaces. And perhaps what we've learnt through this series is the importance of not only telling one's story, but listening to the stories and the truths of others and allowing those stories to change us, to transform us. But at the end of this series, I wanted to do something more than just log its ending. I wanted to explore, now that we have rescued ourselves, what's the next step? What's the next vista? Put another way, okay, so you've rescued yourself. What happens now? And that's the goal of the vlog today. Bend, don't break. And the literature that I've deployed this week has been fascinating. I've moved through the nursing research once more, which has been remarkable, physical, cultural studies, microeconomics, and also higher education studies. Now, all of this remarkable literature will be used in some form, but I do need to recognise the place in which I am recording today. And yes, it is a challenging space and we've got a lot of friends around us. But this isn't just simply an interesting vista. It's not simply an interesting backdrop. I am in Norfolk Island, and it seems so appropriate to end the Rescue Yourself series here. Norfolk Island is just under 1,500 kilometres from Australia. Just under 2,000 people live here, and the total land area is 35 square kilometres. It is the furthest point you can really be from Australia and still be in Australia. And this remarkable place has a complex history. A dark history, an ambivalent history, a history of despair. It has a Polynesian history, it also has a British colonial history. It was, of course, a convict settlement between 1788 and 1855, with an 11-year or so gap in that penal history. But then something very odd happened. The Bounty Mutineers requested of Queen Victoria that they be moved from Pitcairn Island. And so Victoria gifted them Norfolk Island. So the descendants of the Bounty Mutineers populated this island. Now, interestingly, some of those Pitcairn Islanders then returned back to the island in, I think it was 1856 and 1863. But enough of those initial mutineers and their descendants remained so that it became a permanent civilian settlement that has survived to this very day. And to finish the colonial history, and it very much is a colonial history, in 1914, so the First World War, the British government handed this island to Australia to administer it as a territory. And in 1979, Norfolk Island was granted limited self-governance by Australia. It had an elected government that was in charge of ruling and managing its affairs. But through the 2010s, the independence of this island was truncated and severely by Australia. And on the island to this day, it's very much described as Australian colonial rule from Canberra. So Norfolk Island is special because it was the only non-mainland Australian territory to have ever had any level of self-governance, but that self-governance now has disappeared. So as you can see, this is Australia, but this is a different and indeed defiant Australia. It was named after the Duchess of Norfolk, continuing the history of just randomly naming places with no apparent understanding of the place in which they are labelling it. But the name also was given to the huge Norfolk Island Pines that surround me on all sides today. It is mythic. It is mythic. And so it seems appropriate to conclude the Rescue Yourself series in this pretty uncomfortable, difficult place to film, but isn't that sort of the point? So COVID-19 has seen a lot of systems and structures and people break. We've also seen a lot of systems and structures and people bend. And I've been terribly interested in exploring the characteristics of either of those groups, right? So the people and the structures that broke, why did they break? And why did others survive? And understanding those differences, I think that's going to be quite important to our post-pandemic future. In education and healthcare in particular, there have been a lot of discussions about the duty of care, of compassion fatigue, of burnout. So how do we manage high anxiety environments? How do we continue to survive while we're still working through almost an endless cycle of crisis and grief and despair and confusion and structural decay? Perhaps not surprisingly, my first inspiration, I always was going to finish the vlog series here, my inspiration for this session, Bend Don't Break, of course came from Aesop's fable. You know the fable of the oak and the reed? Let's do it. So do you remember, a giant oak stood near a brook in which grew some slender reeds. And when the wind blew, the great oak stood up proudly. Hundreds of its arms were lifted up into the air, but the reeds bowed low with the wind and sang a sad and mournful song. "You have a reason to complain," said the mighty oak. "The slightest breeze ruffles the surface of the water and makes you bow your head, whereas I, the mighty oak, stand upright and firm before the howling tempest." What a party pooper the oak is, eh? Anyway, the reeds replied, "Do not worry about us. The winds do not harm us. We bow before them, so we do not break. You and all your pride and strength have so far resisted the blows, but the end is coming." Love me a bit of goth narrative, this is good. The end is coming. Okay, so as the reeds spoke, the great hurricane emerged from the north, and the oak stood proudly and fought the storm, while the yielding reeds bowed low. The wind redoubled, and all at once the great tree fell, destroyed to its roots. And as it collapsed, it lay among the pitying reeds. Okay, so clearly from this fable we can see just about everything that's happening in contemporary university systems every single day. The proud, unyielding academics do snap. They snap. The careful, quiet, reflexive scholars bend. They also survive. The economic changes in our universities and indeed public sectors everywhere means that we have volatile and uneven funding for research. The 20 years of neglect of teaching and learning embodied through the complete underfunding of a Fordist learning management system that was completely inappropriate to teaching post-Fordist students showed we weren't prepared for any sort of teaching and learning crisis. And of course the other great change is the regulation that we've seen of publishing and authorship. We've also seen incredible changes in our systems as sexual assault, sexual harassment has been called out, and trying to create new spaces, new understanding, new consciousness for our gay, lesbian, bisexual and transgender colleagues. And that's just naming a few of the changes that we had to manage before the pandemic. Okay, so therefore, as you can see, it pays to be those mournful reeds rather than the mighty oak in these times. And it really is time to think about, in this beautiful location, what are those whispering whispering reeds telling us amongst these Norfolk pines. As always, I'm going to raise 10 quick areas for your thought, consideration, and as always, and I've loved it during this series, I welcome your commentary and discussion. Now, at the start of this Rescue Yourself series, I had no real idea where this would go. Unlike, say, the comma series that we did a year ago, I pretty well knew what each week would hold for us. This week was very much, I was responding to students in real time, providing their commentary. So, all of us really though, the project of what we're trying to do here, team, is try to think about what our post-pandemic future may be. And maybe we're going to summon some of those vistas today. So let's do it. 1. Professional relationships require work. Now, we all know, and this is, I think, a truth pretty well universally acknowledged, that there are some pretty mediocre people that hold positions of power in our universities. But look, we can survive this crisis in international higher education by building careful and compassionate and professional communities. So the individual, ego-driven researcher has dominated the films, the novels, the narratives of higher education for, wow, nearly 100 years. You know, the man alone, fighting against the odds in a journey to research discovery. Yes, we've all seen it before. Actually, of course, the best research, the best teaching, the best education emerges from partnerships, emerges from asking and receiving feedback, from silence, from conversation, a demonstration of compassion and care. So when we build these authentic relationships in our universities, particularly between research students and their supervisors, then the entire culture transforms and improves. Now, in a PhD program, most of the time we are enacting tasks that we don't enjoy, okay? We frequently don't know why we're doing what we're doing, and I understand all of that. But what we've got to do to make a successful PhD student and a successful PhD program is we must commit to the process, even if we do not know where that process is going to take us. Now, if we become simply that solitary researcher, the stress of that is going to break us. It's our peers, it's our colleagues, it's our friends that allow us to bend in difficult times. And look, we use a lot of very strong words in our universities. You know, we use rigour, strength, excellence, resistance, passion, power. These are big words. But if you look back on the successful moments in your life, you'll probably find they don't come from strength or power. They come from compassion and compromise. Compassion and compromise create understanding. Strength and power, of course, are frequently based on fear. Fear of being found out, imposter syndrome. Instead, spend time building relationships with your colleagues, caring for your colleagues. And those relationships will not only improve your research and your life, they'll also improve our universities. 2, recognise the value of service. Now, I'm asked to talk about leadership a lot, and I've been asked to talk about leadership for 20-something years, and I'm not really sure why. But there are many models of leadership: charismatic leadership, translational leadership, transactional leadership, but also authentic leadership, just to name a few of the most often used models. And higher education in particular is dominated by charismatic and transactional leadership models. Not the best models, can I say. And in our universities, we rarely hear about service leadership, noting that if you think about it, the whole point of a university in terms of teaching and research is to be of service to our communities. So this lack of attention to service leadership I find quite odd. So once more, you'll notice service leadership sounds a bit weak, like those lowly reeds rather than the mighty, charismatic oak. But service leadership has been around a long time, most associated with an essay by Robert Greenleaf, published in 1970. So it's been around a long time. But service leadership has been around a lot longer than that. It's simply, and at its most basic, about putting other people's needs before your own. Other views, other perspectives are acknowledged, and support is given to members of a team so that they can all achieve their goals. So the reason for this model is that it creates strong relationships within a team, an authentic, caring environment, and the building of trust and innovation. So servant leadership, and indeed service cultures, have a lot of problems surviving in hierarchical, top-down working cultures. And that's of course why they don't work in universities. We have one of the most top-down, rigid structures you can have in terms of power. So our research, our teaching, is historically based on the sage on the stage, or the raging, demanding, aloof, if brilliant, research professor. But this model, while creating transitory success, is not sustainable in our current culture of instability, of confusion, of disruption, and all the really challenging conversations we're having about the post-pandemic future. Intriguingly though, and this is interesting, intriguingly, while I was writing this vlog up from the research, one of the nastiest professors I have ever met, and I've met some shockers, one of the nastiest professors I've ever met, angry, brutalising, self-absorbed, name-calling, has just resigned. And I found out what happened. She did a dummy spit. So she gave her dean an ultimatum, right? My way or the highway. So an oak response, right? My way or the highway. And that mighty oak has now resigned and is about to leave the organisation. So these are not the times for the mighty oak professors. They will break. Even though it's unpopular, it is a time for service, recognising how research partnerships and high quality teaching and learning can lead to our next stage, the next moment in the history of higher education. 3, huge, preparation is power. Preparation is power. Now supposedly, my goodness me, this pandemic was not predictable. That's nonsense. Human history is filled with global health emergencies. But what we did see through the pandemic is how profoundly unprepared our universities were for any type of change or difference. So what we saw is, the complete lack, the neglect of professional development of academics in the last 20 years because they weren't taught how to teach. It meant when they had to change quickly to an online environment, move to a learning management system, change their andragogy, change their processes, change their assessment, a lot of the systems broke. A lot of the teaching and learning systems broke. Now that's caused through 20 years of neglect in professional development and the assumption that just because somebody has a PhD, they can teach. Now I think the pandemic proved the lie, finally, of that statement. And certainly it presented a huge bill through COVID. And of course many academics, tragically, and of course many high-profile universities simply snapped with the strain. And the impact of this last year on our colleagues, on so many academics around the world, will be lived through for a generation. But what is clear from this is preparation is everything. Professional development is everything. Learning is everything. And if we have one way of doing something, whether it be learning or teaching or conducting research, then like that great oak, we are going to snap. Actually, always preparing for a diversity of scenarios and finally, those intricate, under-discussed tropes, interface management, multimodality, disciplinary literacy, suddenly these important words and phrases became crucial to survival of teaching and learning during a pandemic. And therefore, continuing to learn not only rendered the pandemic survivable for some, but innovative, transformative, creating new modes of engagement. And look, I do want to do, if I can, in the middle of this vlog, do an enormous shout out to all the new friends we met at Flinders University from around the world as we conducted our reading groups, our writing groups, all the weird and wonderful things we've done in the last year. And one of the gifts of that, through deterritorialised media, is all the remarkable people we have met. So the innovation has created new behaviours and new communities for which we are grateful. 4. Create thinking time. Create thinking time. Now, I'm always worried about colleagues who fill up their schedules with meetings and emails. I know a lot of these people, right? And they not only confuse the urgent and the important, but they do not structure thinking time into their lives. Thinking can occur while you're exercising, while you're walking, while you're listening to death metal. I'm not bothered. But it allows you to consider options, consider alternatives, and respond with analysis and clarity rather than hot emotion. Thinking, excuse me for a moment, I'm just going to have a cough. As you can see, we're doing pretty well here. So thinking also allows us to recognise how we're feeling and why we feel in that way. But to also know that while our feelings are incredibly important, feelings are not reality. Therefore, please make sure that you've got thinking time in your life, and it will save your life and it will save time. It'll keep you upright. So because you've thought through alternatives, you will be able to bend rather than break. You'll know when to be quiet, to watch and think. 5, yep, know your hotspots. Know your buttons. Now, we all have issues, we all have topics that transform us into the Incredible Hulk. Don't make me angry. You wouldn't like me when I'm angry. We all have those topics. Now, my hotspots are name-calling and rudeness. I really, really hate it. And look, I have to handle a lot of oaks in my job. I really do. And they're name-calling oaks, okay? So at least once a week, one of these oaks describes me as stupid or tedious or pathetic, or my personal favourite, ridiculous. I get ridiculous once a week. Great. And of course, the people that are using this type of language, they're very, very brittle, okay? And when they crack and when they fall, and they do, they take a lot of people with them. So when I'm dealing with my rude oaks, I have particular strategies, because it is my hotspot, and if I behaved emotionally, that wouldn't be right. So what do? Okay, so one of these crazy emails have arrived. I reply, noted. If I have someone yelling at me in a meeting, which does happen a lot, I simply calm myself, look at them and reply, thank you for your commentary. And of course, I use silence a lot. So it's important for you to know the hotspots in your professional and personal life and put in place some strategies to manage them in the quiet times, so when that mighty hurricane emerges, you bend, you don't break, and you survive. 6, value slowness, space, and silence. Now, I've just finished a series of academic articles. I've written some weird stuff in the last few months, and I've called articles like The Panic University, Panic University, Panic Learning, The University at the End of the World. is the piece I've just finished. So this is what happens when you read Paul Virilio's The University of Disaster during a pandemic. It does have a bad effect on you. But I've also conducted an analysis, a very strong one now, of what happened to the universities during the pandemic. And there's been very clear renderings of this. So what actually occurred to our universities? The first thing we know for sure is that the pandemic in our universities was actually a plandemic. There was a lack of planning, and it was decades-long neglect of public health and public education. And of course, the decades-long, centuries-long neglect of our powerful service economy, our cleaners, our couriers, our transportation workers. These colleagues, some of the lowest paid colleagues in our society, showed how important they are to our survival. But secondly, the pandemic is a powerful case study of what goes wrong with not only a lack of planning, but making decisions at speed through panic and a lack of preparation and a lack of reflection. Now, academic life does not require slow thinking or fast thinking. It requires thinking of multiple speeds. And those speeds are determined by the evidence you require to make a strong analysis and interpretation of a situation. Now, Rush was a great Canadian band. I'm a big fan of Rush. Respect to all the Rush people out there. But Rush is not, and rushing is not a model for university life. So always avoid these rapid fire, panicked decisions. Instead, let evidence, argument, interpretation lead your decision making. 7, remain curious. Now, the my way or the highway thinking is always risky. And in institutions that are trying to shed staff, that is the way to end your career really quickly. So instead of the I'm right, there is no doubt, don't you know who I am? You know, those people, don't you know who I am? The great strategies you need to use are actually that allow you to bend, not break. And the way we do that is to remain curious. Curiosity is brilliant because it's a way to endlessly test what you believe, what you think you know to be true. Curiosity allows us to engage with alternative information sources and alternative ideas. So you can find new explanations, new rationales to put your old ideas into a new context. How fantastic is that? Curiosity also allows us to continually focus on the big picture, seeing alternative trajectories and pathways, and avoid getting stuck in past ideas that no longer serve you. 8, always have a plan B. The Oaks have a plan A, and they're absolutely committed to that plan A. And look, it may work for a while, but trust me, no plan lasts forever. The goal of a PhD, the goal of university education more generally, is to give you choices in a difficult time. It also allows you to see alternatives. Now, I've had the privilege of supervising, through a PhD, remarkable paramedic scholars. Paramedicine, big fan of paramedicine, great emerging area. And they taught me so much. In fact, they taught me a rule that changed my life. Their first rule in paramedicine is when you enter the house, always locate your exits. When you enter a house, always locate your exits. So, when you enter a doctoral program, always locate your exits. When you enter a job, always locate your exits. So then you've got alternatives. And those alternatives give you flexibility in your thinking and indeed flexibility in your choices. 9, recognise the instability and the vulnerability of being a PhD student. Now, universities are systems, they are structures, and PhD students have a role, a position in that structure. Now, you don't have much power. You have to accept pretty well what your supervisor asks you to do. I get that, because they have to write you a reference for jobs. I understand all of that. And similarly, when you want to get an article published, you have to acknowledge those referee reports. You might radically disagree with them. I do a lot of the time. But to get the thing published, you've got to work with the referee reports. Now, as we talked about in our vlog last week, in our universities, there is very little space to be vulnerable, to call out disrespect, to call out inequality in any form. And recognising the scale of these injustices, that is why universities have policies and they have procedures. The reason that universities have policies is to protect the people that do not have power in this system. So I'm always wary, and you should be wary as well, of those academics that endlessly express their dislike of policies and governance protocols and procedures. You know, they endlessly use the phrase with me, why can't we do it like we've always done it? Why can't we do it like we've always done it? Why does this policy exist? Well, let me tell you about how we always used to do it in universities. Let's tell the truth. Through the bulk of university history, the majority of the population of the world wasn't even allowed to enrol, let alone graduate. So that's how we've always done it in the past. Most people never get a chance to go to university. Our universities have been integral to the project of colonisation. And of course, to this day, our universities, we are seeing high-profile sexual assault and sexual harassment claims. That's business as usual at our universities. And then, of course, we have the shocking history of research integrity and authorship that exists in our universities, where, you know, the radical idea of the people who actually wrote the article might be authors on it is a bit challenged. If you go through the history of the Vancouver Protocol, you can see the scale at which the scholars who actually did the research were left off the paper, and scholars who had nothing to do with the paper were magically added as authors. That's why the Vancouver Protocol existed, because of the scale of the authorship farce in our universities. Therefore, our universities have policies and procedures to ensure that the disempowered at least have some rights in our system. So there's no doubt profound inequalities still exist in our universities. But understand why policies exist and know that they exist to protect you. That's the reason that they're there. Also, be wary of those academics that laugh at policies, laugh at procedures. For example, one academic once said to me, quote, "It's better to ask for forgiveness than wait for approval," end of quote. It's better to ask for forgiveness than wait for approval. Think about that. Now, that man that said that to me is a full professor in our universities, and they'll give you a real sense about the inequalities in our universities and how our universities protect those that are in power. What policies do is they open up new spaces, new voices in our system, and that's a good thing. 10. Move your mind furniture and ask different questions. Now, we all ask a lot of questions of ourselves, often late at night, that are filled with despair, filled with fear. What is happening to me? Why did they say that to me? Why did they do that to me? Now, these questions are drenched in emotion, in sadness, in fear. But the problem we've got is if you answer those questions, you'll never allow yourself to be rescued, to be able to pick yourself up and take one more step. Because if you answer those questions, why is this happening to me? Think about the answers that you get. Oh, I'm not good enough. She doesn't like me. He doesn't like me. No one likes you. No one cares about you. these are not productive answers for you. The best strategy, I think, is to understand what you are frightened of and name those fears. Write down the fears and they lose their power. Once you've understood the fears, all I then ask of you is that you commit to the process, commit to the PhD, commit to research, commit to being present in the present. So this personal commitment to the process and to the present detaches you from what other people think of you, or what you think other people think of you, which is even worse, and also assembles personal boundaries around yourself. What are you prepared to tolerate and manage, and when will you walk away? When will you be silent? When we appreciate and we are present in the present, it allows you emotional regulation, optimism, empathy, listening. So these 10 bend, don't break strategies, I hope, will help you on a bad day. But more importantly, I want them to be of use to you on a good day, when you are planning who you are and why that identity matters to you as a scholar, as a researcher, and as a teacher. What has been clear, I think, and what indeed was the trigger that made me start this Rescue Yourself series, is all that conversation about the new normal that's going to be created out of COVID made me crazy, right? What was the old normal? What's the new normal? Now, these phrases are meaningless unless we remember what we've lost and indeed who we've lost. The time has come for us, I think, to think about what we can gain if we just have the courage to walk through the pain, walk through the grief, feel the vulnerability, and acknowledge the injustice, and pledge to fight it. The time's come, oh yeah, to call out the oaks and respect those mournful reeds. Today, let's reflect on what we've taken for granted and how the pandemic has brought back what is actually really important, and that's friendship and connection and belonging and listening and caring. Twitter is not the world. The trolling, the ridicule, this stuff is over. What we've got to do now, though, is use the online environment to create new models for accessible, open, diverse discussions about the public good. Our culture has profound opportunities to share diverse ideas, and we as scholars have a responsibility to provide high-quality information and develop high-quality information literacy to understand it. That's our job. We as academics must be different. We must stand for difference. We must stand for being better. This is our future. We can revision our universities, and that revisioning starts with you. It starts with me. It starts with us. Communication, collaboration, community. That's our future. And from this tiny island in the Pacific, an island of darkness, of despair, of longing, of isolation, and maybe, just maybe, some second chances. let's end this Rescue Yourself series. Thank you for putting up with my cold, and I wish you all love, light and peace from the glorious Norfolk Island.